It comes to no surprise to anyone that New York City is one of the most expensive places to live in the entire world. Now, just because New York City is one of the most expensive doesn't mean that you can't find inexpensive ways to live here. Now, I'm definitely not saying it's easy because it definitely isn't, but it is possible. And if you are coming to New York City and trying to live on a budget, you can do it here. You're just gonna have to be a little strategic the way that you do it. When people move to New York City, they have this dream most of the time of living in Manhattan because that technically is the heart of New York City. Now, I'm definitely not discounting the other boroughs at all because there are so many wonderful places to live in New York City outside of Manhattan. But I think so many people just get stuck on the idea of they have to live in Manhattan. As a real estate agent, I see it all the time. When I first moved to New York City to work here, I did not live in Manhattan. I actually didn't even live in New York City. I lived in Jersey. Now, you probably know that the other boroughs outside of Manhattan, meaning Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, Staten Island, are going to be cheaper than living in Manhattan. But a lot of people don't realize how close the state of New Jersey is to New York City. So on the west side of Manhattan, if you look across the Hudson River, you will actually see the skyline of Hoboken, New Jersey, and Jersey City, New Jersey. Both of these places I cannot recommend enough for people who are looking to move to the city for the first time, but they're also looking for more affordable living options, because both of these locations that I just mentioned are actually closer to Manhattan than some areas of the outer boroughs of New York City, which is crazy to think about. You can actually technically live in New Jersey, but be closer to certain areas of Manhattan than if you were living in other areas of New York City. It's kind of crazy if you think about it, but it's the truth. And I honestly loved living in this area and commuting into New York City for work. I had no problems with it at all, and I really don't regret doing that when I first moved here. And the funny thing is when I first started looking at apartments in and around New York City, I didn't know anything about that area at all. It happened to be that some of my coworkers at the time lived over there, and they were the ones who convinced me to come over there and check it out. And I was actually very, very set on living in Williamsburg in Brooklyn at the time. I was only looking at apartments there, and I wasn't really considering any other areas because I felt like it was a great area with great apartments, and it was more in line with my budget at the time. But then when I went over to the New Jersey side, I actually really, really fell in love with it, and I don't regret my decision at all. So look, it's not New York City, but at the same time, I always joke around with people, and I always say that Jersey City and Hoboken are technically like the sixth borough of New York City because it really, really does feel like that when you're there. And when you're living in both of these areas, walking like through the streets, it feels like a city. It feels like you're in a part of New York City. So another thing that you're going to need to rely on when you're on a budget in New York City is the public transportation. Now, I know everyone loves to take Ubers and Lyfts and even cabs when they're in New York City, but these add up so quickly. And I would recommend not doing any of that when you're really, really trying to stay on a budget and just taking advantage of the subways and the bus system. Everybody knows that they're going to have to take advantage of the subways in New York City, especially if you're living in one of the outer boroughs and you need to come in and out of Manhattan. But I feel like not enough people truly take the time to learn the bus system. And the bus system is very, very underrated in New York City. So sometimes, depending on where you're going, it's actually easier to get on one of the bus lines and go to where you need to be. There was this apartment that I lived in Manhattan that was all the way on the west side of Manhattan, and it wasn't really serviced by subways. So because of that, I had to take the bus to either get to the subway or a bus to get to wherever I wanted to go. And that was really the first apartment that made me kind of actually learn the bus system. And I'm kind of really glad I lived there because I didn't realize all the options that you have with the MTA buses in New York City. So I think it's something that people should really take the time to learn. Honestly, I have to say, the buses have become more pleasant than the subways nowadays because the subways definitely need some sprucing up. Let's just say that. New York City is known as having very, very expensive dining and expensive drinks, but there are actually cheap eats that you can find here and cheap happy hour drinks or just deals that you can find. So I definitely recommend that you take advantage of that. When I first moved to the city, I had absolutely no money. So I was the queen of finding $5 eats and cheap happy hours where I can get drinks for under $10. Now, that was years ago. The information is a little bit outdated, and finding $5 eats in the city, unless it's like cheap pizza, is really, really hard to find. But you can definitely find meals for under $10 in a lot of different areas in New York City. You just have to really, really look for it. And I'm going to be doing a lot of content on that specifically because I just think it's so valuable for people. And I know so many people move to New York City with hardly any money. I was one of them. And I had to get really, really creative to figure out ways to be able to pay my rent every single month. There are ways to do it. And there are also ways to do it where you don't feel like you're missing out on everything that New York City has to offer. So when I first moved here, I was not fine dining. I was either cooking for myself or getting these cheap eats that I was able to find around the city. Basically just going to happy hours to like meet people, mingle, and like be with my coworkers. That's what I was doing. And I loved it. I had a great time. I'm sure you're probably familiar with the site Groupon. And Groupons do exist in New York City. But there's also another website that I want you to take advantage of, and it's called Post. Post is like local here in New York City. They might be in a few other cities around the world, but I definitely know that they're here in New York City. I used to use these type of deals all the time, whether it was like a date night deal or just like some type of fun experience. They have like these discounts that they do that are actually really, really, really good. So I used to be able to get Pulse deals where I'd go out to eat with somebody and we would pay like $50 for say like a bottle of wine and 2 meals and a dessert or something like that, or an appetizer. appetizer, and it was always a great time. I went to some really, really great restaurants, and sometimes it's hit or miss on sites like that, but you can really take advantage of some of these deals that they have in and around New York City. Something else that I want you to take advantage of too is when you are ordering out for like takeout and things like that, take advantage of all the promotions on all these different apps like Uber Eats, Grubhub. Take advantage of the promotions, because if you sign up for different ones, there are so many different promotions that you could take advantage of. Even if the price of a place isn't that cheap, you're getting so many promotions where you can make the food much cheaper than it typically is. So take advantage of those promotions and be strategic when you're signing up for those different apps. Again, my information's a little outdated with the apps, but I used to be doing all different types of tricks to get all different types of deals on these apps. And I want you to remember, some of the best things in New York City are actually free. Now, I have a lot more money now than when I first came to New York City, when I literally had nothing. And I have to say, some of my favorite activities in New York City to this day are some of the things that I used to do when I had no money. And I would just take a walk around New York City or Central Park or something like that. Like, it was just the most simple things that even if I can afford to go to some fine dining restaurant now, sometimes I'd rather do something so simple like that and just grab a cup of coffee for like cheap or something like that. It's kind of crazy that things are so expensive here, but sometimes the best things here are absolutely free. So I want you to keep that in mind as well. So I would love to hear your experiences. And if you guys have any ideas that you can share with other people in the comments, I would absolutely appreciate that, because as always, I just love hearing from you guys so much.